Now, the other side is obviously Jim Knowles has got about the biggest target on him of anybody in college football right now. And I don't remember the exact stats, but they were in the 650-yard range, Georgia, in total yards. 648 comes to mind. So obviously, Lathan Ransom falls down, loses track of the wide receiver, and that's just one play following the would-be fake punt that would have been successful. And again, the overall defensive performance, there were some gash runs that obviously hurt, and big pass plays downfield. Again, it was more that if you took 80 to 90% of the plays, you would say Ohio State was probably, their defense was relatively successful, but it was the big plays that hurt.
It's been the story of these last two games, and Jim Knowles has said all season, 5 big plays or fewer, you can win games. I think that was true in most of the Big Ten. I think that was exactly 5 plays is what hurt them against Michigan. Now, the offense wasn't at its best in that game where it was in this game. Obviously, significantly more. I think 10 plays of 20, 25 yards or more. Look, some of that is Georgia's offense, and Ohio State obviously made a very good Georgia defense look bad as well with some of their plays. But you've got to get enough stops, and Ohio State wasn't able to do that. And it's the crucial stops. And I think we talked throughout the offseason, this defense doesn't need to be number 1 in the country for Ohio State to win a national championship. It just needs to be good enough to get the ball back to C.J. Stroud and the offense. And this was the epitome of that. Look, in the third quarter, they came out and they helped Ohio State get a lead, 14-point lead, I think is what it was, by getting stops. They were stuffing the run. I think Georgia ended the third quarter with just 37 yards, and 17 of that came on the last play of the third quarter, a pass play. I mean, the third quarter was as good of defense as Ohio State has played all year, but then you just weren't able to close it out in the fourth. And Lathan Ransom slips. That's not a scheme issue other than he doesn't have help over the top, but it is a thing where he kind of got turned around with the receiver and I think slipped because of that. So, technique and coaching goes a little bit into that. But that last drive, I mean, I know it's tough to stop a team and hurry up. Jim Knowles was asked about being in man defense after the game, and he said, look, we've won in man before. And, if you lose in man on a situation like that, of course, everyone's going to question why you were in man defense, right? If they were in zone and they'd been beaten, it would have been the same thing. He doesn't want to play a bend but don't break defense. That he wants to be aggressive. They weren't as aggressive in this game. There were significantly fewer blitzes, and the idea was to try and help limit those big plays. So I think some credit needs to go to Georgia. Look, they had players make plays. Stetson Bennett, that's a story that I don't understand with just how good the kid has become. I thought coming into this year that could be the issue. Obviously, he helped him win the national championship last year, but now that everybody has film on him and whatnot, I thought maybe that may be their downfall. It wasn't, and he was great once again. The kid's proven he's a legit quarterback, and you've got to do stuff. You got to get pressure on him. They didn't do that enough, especially in the fourth quarter. There will certainly be some evaluation needed of this Ohio State defense this offseason. And I know the immediate fan reaction is fire this guy, fire that guy. I don't think that's going to be the solution. The staff mostly is in its first year at Ohio State. They did pretty well. There needs to be improvement, though. The secondary has to be better. The defensive line has to get more pressure. This has been an issue for a few years now with Larry Johnson. So, I don't think they're going to just fire coaches left and right, but there does have to be some looking in the mirror, some examination of why in the 2 biggest games of the year they weren't able to play defense at the level that they expect to.
This is surface analysis I'm about to throw out there because I made the same comment when Jim Knowles was hired, that everyone looked at Oklahoma State's top 5 ranked defense and said, that's what we need here. There we go. There's the guy. But if you looked at his career rankings or the trajectory of the defense from the time he was hired at Oklahoma State, they actually regressed before they progressed and got better. Now, there's a lot of factors involved there, recruiting and personnel and players and all sorts of different things and opponents that play into that. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't do the job from day one. But that was just a cautionary tale to say this isn't just, this guy produced a top 5 defense at Oklahoma State. Therefore, he's going to do this with better players and more talented players at Ohio State. I don't know what that means and how good the guy ultimately is going to be in regards to what he can accomplish here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there's plenty of good about what Jim Knowles wants to do. The aggression defensively works a lot of the time. I think the defensive line has to be better because if you can get pressure, and they have too much talent for it to not be better. If you can get pressure that way and you don't have to blitz, then you don't have to be as aggressive. You can bring the blitz more selectively. And I think he's good at picking times. Sometimes you're going to get burned on that. But I think more often than not, especially with the offense that Ohio State should continue to have, that type of defense will be okay. I do think, another year will help. But there certainly are some questions with the way you want to play defense. No defense is perfect. But look, I mean, they're trying to adapt. I think offenses have adapted. You're not always seeing the spread anymore. I mean, you just saw Penn State in the Rose Bowl line up in the T formation and things like that. You have to be ready for that, especially in the Big Ten. And I think that was an adjustment for him. Georgia had a lot of different looks. It wasn't like, Georgia's one style of offense. They can line up under center. They can line up in heavy sets, but they can also spread you out. Jim Knowles has to, this isn't Oklahoma State anymore, and Jim Knowles has to evaluate this whole year. I also think you have to look at the secondary coaches. 2 new secondary coaches this year in Tim Walton and Perry Eliano. I think we've heard good things about them, but how good was Ohio State cornerbacks this year? There was a lot of injuries. Cameron Brown was out. Denzel Burke was out at times. Jordan Hancock missed a lot of the year. So, maybe it's having to do with that and not having time to work with these guys. But, there are certainly questions about the defense. I mean, you don't have a back-to-back performances defensively like that and get out scot-free, right? So, it's going to be an off-season of a lot of looking in the mirror, I think, mostly on the defensive side of the ball, but I think they can still examine how they can do things better offensively, especially when, you are going to have a quarterback competition. While you assume Devin Brown or Kyle McCord is going to be the next great Ohio State quarterback, because that's what Ryan Day's done, I don't think you can just expect that necessarily. I saw something earlier. The last 3 Ohio State quarterbacks have all set Big Ten quarterback rating records. Is that going to, eventually that doesn't continue, right? Eventually you have a quarterback that's just not quite as good. And you've seen with a program like Clemson, when you get the quarterback wrong, things can go downhill very fast. So if you're Ohio State, I think you need to figure out, okay, how do we get this run game consistent? Because at points it was really good this year. Injuries obviously played a part, but you need to have a plan with the rushing attack. If there are injuries, it needs to sustain. It needs to be able to run in a game like this better. I think the longest run Ohio State had was 17 yards by Dallin Hayden, and that didn't come till into the third quarter. I know the Buckeyes didn't plan to run the ball. They knew they could attack Georgia through the air. Georgia's run defense is very good, but what was their total rushing yards here? Ohio State ended with 119, and a lot of that came from C.J. Stroud late. Dallin Hayden was the leading rusher with 43 yards. I think you need more from that going forward. Again, especially if your quarterback isn't as elite as C.J. Stroud was in this game.